Freud lives on, both in a clinical setting and in a university, but Freud at Yale, for instance, is much more likely to be found in the history department or the literature department than in the psychology department. And this is typical enough. But despite all of the sort of sour things I just said about Freud, the big idea, the importance of the dynamic unconscious, remains intact. We will go over and over and over again, different case studies, where some really interesting aspects of mental life prove to be unconscious. Now, there's one question. I'm actually going to skip over this for reasons of time, and just go to some examples of the unconscious in modern psychology. So, here's a simple example of the unconscious in modern psychology. Language understanding. So when you hear a sentence like, John thinks that Bill likes him, in a fraction of a second, you realize that this means that John thinks that Bill likes John. If you heard the sentence, John thinks that Bill likes himself, in a fraction of a second, you would think that it means John thinks that Bill likes Bill. And as we will get to when we get to the lecture on language, this is not conscious. You don't know how you do this. You don't even know that you are doing this, but you do it quickly and instinctively. So much of our day-to-day life can be done unconsciously. There are different activities you can do. Driving, chewing gum, shoelace tying, where if you're good enough at them, if you're expert enough at them, you don't know you're doing them. I was at a party a few years ago for a friend of mine, and we ran out of food. So he said, I'll just go pick up some food. An hour later, he was gone. Still gone. You know, it was supposed to be around the corner. And we called him up on his cell phone. And he said, oh, I got on the highway and I drove to work. You know, he works like an hour away. We got on the highway to drive. And some version of these things happen all the time. Maybe more surprising, Freud's insight that our likes and dislikes are due to factors that we're not necessarily conscious of has a lot of empirical support, from research into social psychology, for example. So for instance, here's one finding from social psychology. If somebody goes through a terrible initiation to get into a club, they'll like the club more. You might think they'd like it less because people do terrible things to them, but actually hazing is illegal, but a remarkably successful tool. The more you pay for something, the more you like it, and the more pain you go through to get something, the more you like it. From the standpoint of politics, for instance, if you want loyal people in a political campaign, do not pay them. If you pay them, they'll like you less. If they volunteer, they'll like you more. And we'll talk about why. There's different theories about why. But my point right now is simply that people don't necessarily know this, but still they're subject to this. Another example is some weird studies done in a discipline of social psychology known as terror management, which involves subliminal death primes. The idea of subliminal death primes is this. You sign up for your human subjects requirement, and then they put you in front of a computer screen. And then they tell you, oh, just sit in front of the computer screen and we'll ask you some questions. And then the questions come out, and they're questions like, how much do you love your country? What do you think of Asians? What do you think of Jews? What do you think of blacks? What do you think of vegetarians? What do you think of people's political views? Different from yours. Here's the gimmick. What you don't know is, on that computer screen, words are being flashed. Like that. But they're being flashed so fast it looks like that. You don't see anything. Words like corpse, dead, dying. The flashing of these subliminal words, subliminal meaning a fancy term, meaning below the level of consciousness, you don't know you're seeing them, has dramatic effects on how you answer those questions. People exposed to death crimes become more nationalistic, more patriotic, less forgiving of other people, less liking of other races and people from other countries. Again, the explanation for why this is so is something which we'll get to in another class. The point now is simply to illustrate that these sort of things can have, that things you aren't aware of can have an effect on how you think. The final example I'll give of this is a short demonstration. To do this, I'm going to cut the class in half at this point. So you'll be on this side of the class, the right side, my right, and this will be on the left side. And I simply want everybody to think about somebody you love. So think about somebody you love, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your mom, your dad. Think about somebody you love. Just think about somebody you love. Okay. Now, on this screen is going to be instructions, but I want to give the instructions to this half of the class. So I'm going to ask everybody in this half of the class, please either turn your head or shut your eyes. Okay? Teaching fellows too. Okay. And everybody on this half, obey. Okay, have everybody read that? Okay. Oh. Okay. Now, turn your head, this group. Now, this group, look at this. And take a moment. You don't have to do it on paper, but take a moment to do it in your head. Each group had instructions. Some people might have seen both instructions. Follow the instructions you got for you. Now, this was research done by Norbert Schwartz, and here's the question I want you to ask yourself. How much do you like this person? And here's the effect. Half of you were asked to list 3 features of the person. Half of you were asked to list 10. The finding, which is not a subtle finding, is that liking goes up in the 3 group and liking goes down in the 10 group. And here's why. I have to think about 3 positive features of somebody. So, I think about my girlfriend. I have a girlfriend. I think my girlfriend. Oh, she's smart, she's beautiful, and she's kind. Good. How much what do I think of her? Pretty good. Smart, beautiful, kind. Smart, beautiful. Oh, yeah. But the problem, now Schwartz is clever, though. He says, listen, the other group gets 10 positive features. Smart, beautiful, kind, really nice, good cook, punctual, smart. No, I mentioned that. The problem is, nobody has 10 positive features. And the effect of being asked to do 10 positive features is people find this hard. And then those people, when asked, how much do you like this person? Say, couldn't really make it that 10. I guess I don't like them very much. Now the point of this illustration, again, is that it shows that you don't know this. Subjects who are asked to do 10 positive features and then later rank the person lower, and then asked, why did you rank the person lower? Don't say, because you told me to list 10. Typically, we are oblivious to these factors that change our points, what we like and what we dislike. And this is, in fact, a substantial and important part of the study of psychology, and particularly, for instance, the study of racial and sexual prejudice, where one of the big findings from social psychology, and we'll devote almost an entire lecture to this, is that people have strong views about other races that they don't know about, and that they don't know control their actions. So to some extent, this rounds out Freud, because to some extent, the particulars of Freud are, for the most part, have been rejected. But the general idea of Freud has actually been so successful, both in the study of scientific psychology and in our interpretation of everyday life, that to some extent Freud's been a victim of his own success. We tend to underestimate the importance of Freudian thought in everyday life because he's transformed our worldview to such an extent that it's difficult for us to remember that there's any other way to think about it. So to some extent, he's been a victim of his own success. We have time for some further questions about Freud and about scientific implications of Freud. I took a class once on how to teach when I was a graduate student. And I just remember two things from this class. One thing is never grade in red pen. People don't like that. The second thing is never ask any questions, because presumably it's very frightening. Say, any questions? And people find it's intimidating. I'm supposed to ask, what are your questions? So, what are your questions? Yes, and back. Sorry. Did Freud believe in? Medication. Freud had it's a good question. The question was, did Freud believe in medication? Medication, of course, being a major theme of how we deal with certain disorders now, particularly depression and anxiety disorders. On the one hand, Freud made its start as a neuroscientist. Freud studied the mind and the brain and was intensely interested in the neural basis of thought and behavior. But the answer to your question in the end is no. Although Freud was very sensitive to the brain basis of behavior, Freud was totally convinced that the method through which to cure disorders like depression and anxiety would not be medication, but rather through the sort of talk therapy and insight. Moreover, modern therapists, including some people who aren't psychoanalytically defined, will say, look, these drugs are all well and good, but what they do is they mask the symptoms. So if you have panic attacks, say, it's true the drugs might make the panic attacks go away, but the panic attacks are actually not your real problem. And by making them go away, you don't get to the root of your problem. So the answer is both Freud and modern-day psychoanalysts would think that medications are substantially overused in the treatment of mental disorders. Yes? The question is, what about research on dreams? Dreams is such a fun topic that I'm going to devote half a class to sleeping in dreams. So for instance, I will answer the question, what is the most common dream? I will also answer the question, who thinks about sex more in dreams, men or women? And what proportion of, there's so many great questions I will answer. Dreams from a Freudian standpoint, there's been some evidence that dreams often do have some relationship to what you're thinking about and worrying about through the day. But the strong Freudian view about symbolism and wish fulfillment has not been supported by the study of dreams. What are your other questions? Yes, whoever Eric is pointing to.
Purple shirt.
Purple shirt. Yes. The Electra complex? The Electra complex is the penis envy story. Freud developed, this is a crude summary, but Freud developed the Oedipal complex. You know, mom, I love mom, hey dad. And then it's as if somebody reminded him, Sigmund, there are also women. Oh yeah. And that story I told you with the penises and the penis envy and the replacement is a sort of a very shortened version of the Electra complex. I think it's fair to say that the Electra complex was a sort of add-on to the main interest of Freud, the Oedipal complex. One more, please. Yes?
So are women stuck in that stage for the rest of their life, according to Freud? Like in that envy, penis envy, or does he not continue to explain?
According to Freud, it's not a fixation in the stage in the same sense as an oral or anal stage. But yes, the claim that Freud would make is that the woman's discovery that she lacks the penis plays a fundamental role later on determining her allegiances in life, and in fact her own sexual preferences and interests. So it's not the sort of thing that affects her just for a short period.